Hello.
So, Graham, let's start with a music producer. This was a little bit cryptic, this, who shot from the hip. This was in Harrogate. Who was this music producer? What was the context?
Well,
Why shooting from the hip?
well, Ken, yeah, it was a charity night for Harrogate Hospital at Starling Bar, and it was a packed crowd to see me doing a Q&A with Ken Scott, who worked with the Beatles on Hard Day's
Indeed.
Night, Help, Rubber Soul,
Indeed.
Sergeant Pepper, White Album, various other tracks. Then he worked with George Harrison, All Things Must Pass. Then John Lennon, Cold Turkey, David Bowie on Hunky Dory, Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane, Pinups, Elton John with Honky Chateau and Don't Shoot the Piano Player. Supertramp Crime of the Century, and that was the reason for the event. It was the 50th anniversary of the release of Supertramp's best album, not the biggest hit leading album, but the
Their
best
best
album,
album.
Crime of the Century, which he produced with the band in 1974. So he turns up, and he's now 77. He's like, looks like a cuddly, white-haired, Flemish bear man. And he's got twinkle. He's doing the whole Q&A.
Yeah.
Nice. No, obviously legendary what he's done. He knows and all the stories.
Yeah.
When you're talking to him, he's got that also mischievous look. So, so you're obviously like, seeing how great he is as you're doing this, because he is great, Mr. Ken. And he's nice, and he's looking at you, and he's twinkling in the eye. But then when you ask a question or you bring up a subject, he doesn't mince his words. My good God. I mean, I can't repeat what he said about Roger Hodgson, the lead singer of Supertramp, because
Really,
my God, it's libelous. Yeah. But so I'm not going to say
Can
it.
you try and, as an expert journalist of many years' experience, can you possibly do a cleaned up version?
Yeah, I'll only say it involves money. And when I said to him, like, I know this is about Supertramp, but
so was that the crime of the century, Graham, according to Ken, that he didn't get the money?
Oh yeah, good line. But anyway, he talked a bit about the box set that came out this year, the David Bowie's Rock and Roll Star, which he was heavily involved with.
Yeah.
Which is like 5 CDs and a Blu-ray of the whole year of that.
It's extremely expensive. These things always are. But yeah.
Yeah, but it's worth it though, because it's lots of great stuff that comes.
Oh, absolutely.
Then I asked him about the Beatles, and he liked Get Back because he worked on White Album, and he said that story that the Beatles were like angry with each other the whole time and couldn't work together. And he used the words bull something. He used the word bull something like that. He said, they had the occasional argument and falling out like all the bands that I've worked with over the 50 years. But it wasn't a big deal. And he said he loved Get Back. He thought it was really good. I said, well, how about Now and Then? And like, he looked furious at Now, and he said it's just a reheated souffle, and started shaking his head. And I said, well, Paul McCartney started playing it on his live gigs, and he went, oh, good grief. This is a man who's worked.
But that's an interesting position for him to be in, because how much could he indicate to them that he wasn't impressed by a particular song or whatever, or did he just have to kind of eat it up and go with it and just rely on his technical skills to do what they wanted to do?
Yeah, George Martin was the producer, and then on the Get Back sessions, you had Glyn Johns involved a lot. And although occasionally Ken would step at the producer's role with the Beatles in the 1960s on classic tracks like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, for example, he was usually an engineer. An engineer's job isn't to steer the band, it's to help them get interesting sounds as they're arranging tunes in the studio.
Yeah, and there's a good distinction there, yes.
You also got to remember that Glyn Johns in the Get Back film, he tries to steer the Beatles towards things, but he's doing it in a very gingerly fashion, because he knows this is the Beatles, and if he oversteps the mark even slightly, they're going to tell him to clear off. So I don't imagine that with the Beatles you had to have a thick skin, otherwise you couldn't survive. But you also had a thick skin, but you couldn't be that vocal about it because you would get in trouble. But Ken has got a thick skin because he's worked with everybody and done everything.
Yeah.
And nowadays, since he only occasionally works in the studio, although he is an academic music producer type guy at Leeds Beckett University, he doesn't produce all the time in the studio. So he's semi-retired, so he can't afford on these small gatherings of aficionados to like, lay bare the truth and fire all guns blazing.
Does he think that the role of the engineer is fully appreciated?
Well, he thinks that's not the job anyway. The job of the engineer producer is not to be the star. Even to this day, even though his name's on the back cover of big selling albums, he says the producer is not the star. My job is to make the act, the band, the singer sound as good as they can possibly sound. I'm not there to hold the limelight.
So like a good referee, you don't notice him.
It's not that so much. It's that even if you do notice him, he's not going to leap out and suddenly be the star of the band. He's not the lead singer,
No.
At best, the producer engineer is the drummer. And although some
producers become famous, but there must be something, Graham, about his work that made it. I mean, you ran through the litany of artists that he worked with. So he was the go-to man for engineering, wasn't he? So there must have been something about what he did with his engineering work, including the producers must have liked him as well as the band.
Well, you can tell the difference between Supertramp with Ken Scott and Supertramp without Ken Scott.
Because so what's
what
the
he's
difference?
Very good at, a little bit of crunch and hardness, which the Beatles always had, which Boy always had when Ken Scott was involved. So he brings a little bit of crunch and hardness. He creates a loose sound, but it's actually tightly sculpted, very tight arrangements. Nothing's overplayed. Nothing goes on too long. The layers of the sound all work in perfect harmony. These are all things he learned with the Beatles and brought to David Bowie on Supertramp. And he does know that. He knows what he's doing. I mean, the last time he did this Q&A was in 2018 for Vinyl Sessions with me and Colin Payne. And that time he played as a little bit of Starman. And he played as the basic with like maybe one or two instruments. And I thought, good grief, this isn't very good. Then he put another layer on, then a second layer, a third layer. And by merely layering instruments, it suddenly became a fantastic track.
Yeah.
And that's what he did with Beatles. That's the Supertramp. He knows how to make it sound great by what you do with instruments. That's why he's a great engineer producer.
The technology, of course, has, well, I'm loath to say it's become more sophisticated, but it has changed, obviously, the way that recordings are done now. Has the role of the engineer changed? I mean, the great albums that you mentioned were from a sort of 70s peak, but I mean, the engineer's role now, has it been made easier by the changes in technology, or is actually there's still a certain sophistication of the ear as to how to get an instrument to sound its best?
No, he thinks that because of the computer age and the fact you can have 2,000 tracks because you've got, as opposed to the Beatles who worked mainly in 4-track.
Yeah, exactly.
By then, they were working 8-track and then
8-track,
veering towards 16-track, but that was quite rare. He says they've got so many they've got so many tracks now, you don't need a traditional engineer unless you're trying to record old style in the studio. He says in general, producers now and producers are musicians. If you look at a modern song, they can be like 10 credits because each person contributes one bit to the track and it's all done on computer and they can make any sound they want. And he says the invention's gone because the discipline's gone because you can do whatever you want as many times as you want over and over again. Everybody brings in samples. Everybody says, like, let's get that sound from a previous track. So everybody compares like what sound they want from what they've heard before. And it just isn't getting real musicians together in the studio with limitations on what you can do, which forces you to be creative and inventive. He says it's all become, he's not a fan of most modern music. That's a fair.
So could engineering be done by AI in the future?
Well, yeah, but it doesn't even need to be anyway because, most modern pop acts are already behaving like AI. But yeah, obviously it could.
Good point. Now, Graham, so that's the kind of, we're looking at the recent, well, the past of music and the skills that go with that. You went to the opposite end of that. You went to Leeds Brudenell Social Club, yours and mine, one of my favorite places to go to. And this was to have the future of guitars was the, more to the point, the future of guitar bands was the focus. And this was at an all-day gig of the future of the guitar bands. Of course, I mentioned in passing that there were Oasis are back next year only because of the emphasis on guitar. Sometimes it's gone from a lot of work, but actually, I think amongst many of us, you still cherish a great guitar sound. And I wondered how then you found the future of the guitar was shaping up at Leeds Brudenell Social Club.
Very few of the bands had anything in common with Oasis apart from guitars. I saw 6 bands between 4 p.m. at 11 p.m. at Brudenell in Leeds the other Saturday. It's a very enjoyable occasion, but all the 6 bands were bands you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And the biggest band from London, who headlined, called Crows, Crows, and they were the most professional, the most focused. Every movement by lead singer was perfect. Every movement by the band members was perfect. All the songs had no loose moments in them. They were all totally right on. They were a bit sort of like a slightly post-punk, slightly the Editors, if you remember them from the noughties.
Yeah.
But the problem with them was that although they had the most professional approach and they were a good band, none of the songs stuck in your head. There was they were so professional that there was nothing to get your teeth into, although they were popular. And the other bands I found more interesting, even though technically they weren't actually quite as good. So the best band of all was a first band called Fozzick, Fossick, and they were like a full of dark, heavy grooves, and a bit like pigs, and pigs, except not quite as annoyingly noisy.
Yeah.
And on top of that, their grooves were fantastic. The only problem was every time it got past the original verse groove, with great bass and guitar sound and great drumming, the chorus was just the lead singer, just the lead guitar player, shouting. And the chorus didn't have any extra notes, no change of riff, no extra sound. It was just him shouting, and it was like you're almost wanting the chorus not to happen. Just stick with that groove. And the bass, fantastic. The bass player spent the whole gig locked in a loop with the drummer, so the drummer and the bass player were working together the whole time to get that groove spot on. And I loved that groove, but because the choruses weren't very good, I went and sought out the bass player afterwards and congratulated him on a great gig and said how great he and the drummer were and how enjoyed it. I said, my God, you need to get better choruses, otherwise.
How did that go down, Graham? That's always a nervous moment.
He took it reasonably well. He didn't get angry.
I mean, I think it's not an unreasonable. Not an unreasonable assumption for me that great guitar bands, the chorus is pretty vital. Along with, I mean, it was a time when the guitar solo was absolutely essential, but it seems to me that's rather like the middle eight. The guitar solo is not as important as it used to be, but the chorus is important, except in the world of Coldplay, where they avoid choruses.
Well, that's still the point. If you can't do a good chorus, don't bother. Stick to that groove, because the groove was great.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were my favorite band because of the groove. And the other interesting band was from Bristol, called Heavy Lung. And the lead singer was the best lead singer of the day. He took it around the stage, then he was off the stage and he was in the middle of the audience singing. And unlike other people who do that, you can see it's all part of a routine. You can look in their eyes and you can see that they haven't lost the plot. They're not really wild rollers. It's just they think that's a good thing to do to make the band look exciting. This guy was different. This guy meant it. Like, when he acted like a demented frontman leaping around and spending ages inside the crowd at the Brudenell, it didn't seem to be an act. He seemed to be genuinely a bit like a classic unhinged frontman. And that tied into my experience of him before the actual show, because I'd gone to Luke at one point in the Brudenell, and I came out like skinny chap, and I was waiting to wash my hands, and he was there first, and he was washing his hands furiously, like it was the most important thing in the world. And I thought, God, he's a bit odd. And an hour or so later, I'm looking on stage, and I'm thinking, I recognize that guy. Oh, it's him from the Lou. So he was the real deal.
Ferociously clean lead singer. Yeah.
So that was the interesting things about it. I mean, all the bands and some merit, but Crows were the most professional.
I suppose the blunt question, Graham,
the
blunt question is,
and Heavy Lung and the best singer.
So what's the heavy groove's fine, but the question is, does the guitar have a future?
I think it has a future, but it has a future like maybe slightly bigger than jazz. I see the future of guitar bands being like jazz. Jazz has never gone away. Jazz still has an audience. Jazz is still taking it seriously, but jazz is not mainstream. And unless something changes, which you never know it might, guitar bands are going to end up in the same way. And I would say if BBC Six Music didn't exist in Britain, the whole guitar band scene would become even smaller. It would just be a niche. It would be a niche that most people had no idea about and had no interest in.
I mean, what we have at the moment is, and I mentioned Oasis, but I could mention AC/DC. So the bands that have guitars that are popular are not new breakthrough bands. They are the big bands of the past making comebacks.
Yeah, but there are bands that are popular. I mean, you can't deny that Fontaines DC are popular.
I wouldn't call them particularly a guitar band, Graham, would you? I mean, it's
yeah,
there,
definitely.
but you'd call Idols a guitar band. I get that. You get that.
Fontaines DC are heavily based on guitar, as are
Yeah.
Last Dinner Party. They do occasionally use some samples or some drum machines or some keyboards, but they're still largely guitar bands. Just like, despite the fact Arctic Monkeys haven't been classic Arctic Monkeys for quite a while now, when they're still live, they're still playing guitars with one guy and keyboards. They're not standing there like over record decks or loads of synths. They're still guitar bands. But they're all successful, but they're not totally mainstream. Yeah. So if that's what it's like now, if things like BBC Music die, or the live music scene, which is in trouble partly because of the cost of living crisis, if that continues to decline, it'll end up being something that is very niche, like jazz.
Yes, I went to I mean, would I call it a retro gig? I suppose I would. I went to see Peter Hook and the Light play.
Oh yeah.
And this, as you know, Peter Hook's dedicated recent years to doing one by one in album order. He did the Joy Division albums and then did all the New Order albums, and he does absolute faithful versions of them. Now, the latest tour is the Substance tour. I think it began with certain shows last year, and now the tour's a world tour this year. And so it's very authentic versions of both Joy Division and New Order songs. And this was at the York Barbican, and the way it worked was that he had a band of which I suppose the best known member of the band was David Potts, who's with him in both Revenge and Monaco, two of the bands that Peter Hook's done. There was also guesting on the night. I think Paul Curry from the Coral was playing, and there was a new keyboards player taking part as well. And of course, there was a drummer, but it was absolutely authentic versions. That seemed to be the aim. It didn't seem to be wanting to bring anything particularly new to it. It was partly a celebration of his remarkable bass playing that is so extraordinarily melodic, and just an appreciation of playing those songs, because obviously he and Barney and Stephen are not going to be performing together again. It seems, that there ain't no love lost there. So he goes out and does these songs in a way that he feels honors the songs, honors Ian Curtis, and I think his other enjoyment actually was to show the differences between New Order and Joy Division. But he didn't do the obvious thing of Joy Division first set, and then New Order as the second set of Substance. It started with the New Order Substance version, but actually at the very start there was a bit of both, and then he went into New Order's version of Substance. And then did the Joy Division version, which of course is, as he put it, more difficult music, more difficult to play, and it ends up with Love Will Tear Us Apart, which I think probably is the reason actually overall why he ended up with doing Joy Division as the second set, because you then end with that song and the impact that it has. I enjoyed the night in a very retro way. It was kind of one of my all our yesterdays type nights. And I rather think it was the same for everyone in the audience there.
I don't think Joy Division are made for nostalgia. They were way too intense and serious. But New Order were, a bit frothier.
I can see that.
Obviously dancing. But Joy Division, to me, like, you shouldn't touch Joy Division.
Would you have done it the other way around then? Would you have gone with, as you say, more naturally nostalgic, easier to be nostalgic about New Order than the difficult Joy Division songs? Or do you actually think, no, fair enough? Actually, because they're clearly not as commercial as the songs. They're not as obviously melodic. A lot of them.
I'm not saying you can't enjoy it, but Peter Hook wasn't the vocalist. Peter Hook was only the bass player, and sure had a fantastic bass sound. But to have like him doing The Order and Joy Division as the only member of either band, it's a bit like if Ringo toured as the Beatles. If he actually.
No, that's interesting, because I think, and you went in famously, the Byrds played in Harrogate with just the drummer left in the band. Yeah. I think this is different because he's such a significant musician from that era. His bass playing is still in demand. I agree with that, but... If you look at the Aries, one of the songs by Gorillaz, it went to #1 in America. He's playing bass on it, so his bass is still being commissioned because it's so distinctive. And I still had a thrill in listening to him playing bass. I still enjoyed that. That didn't feel nostalgic to me. That's just an appreciation that through all these years of his bass
Yeah, I know,
playing.
but we saw that one of the first gigs by The Good, the Bad, and the Queen
Yes,
with Paul Simon of The Clash on
we did.
bass.
Yes, we did.
Now, he was fantastic on bass at that gig. Great for The Good, the Bad, and the Queen. But I would want to see The Clash go back on tour with only Paul Simon on bass playing
No.
in the band, because it's not real, is it? It's
No.
actually be a tribute.
Yeah, I see. I'm resistant to call it tribute. I don't think, I think it's more than that. But I can tell, we're a little divided on this. Let's just, if we make as we've got, it's a brief recording tonight. You attended the funeral along with the arts world at large of one of our former guests here on Two Big Egos in a Small Car, Heath Common. Tell me, Graham, where that was. How that life was celebrated and who was there.
Well, it was St Wilfrid's Church on Duchy Road in Harrogate, the biggest
church in Harrogate.
And the only Grade 1 listed building in Harrogate. It's a magnificent building and it's huge.
It is.
And the place was packed with musicians, writers, authors, teachers, ex-pupil, and all his family and friends, because he was a successful head teacher in the Manchester and West Yorkshire area for many years, and inspirational. Pupils turned up to pay tribute to Heath, or Bill Byford, as he was born, born 69 years ago. They turned up to pay tribute, having not seen him for 35 years.
Yeah.
That's how influential he was as a teacher. Then he became a writer, the melody maker in The Guardian, interviewed the likes of Stone Roses early on, knew them personally, was friends with Ian Brown, got to know Marky Smith the Fall, got totally embedded in that community. And then he became a beatnik poet musician in a sort of like style of Ginsberg and Kerouac. He got embedded in that British beatnik poetry world. Then he started doing Q&As at Louder Than War Literature Festival in Manchester with John Robb, and started interviewing people like P.P. Arnold on stage. Basically, anything the guy turned his hand to, he was inspired, because he was such a nice guy, but he wasn't a weak nice guy.
No,
he was very strong. He was not scared of anything, and he called a spade, even though he was utterly positive. And this is what came across from his family, his widow and his sister, his brother, and his daughter, all who gave fantastic eulogies, probably the best eulogy I've seen, and did it unscripted, from the heart, but with intelligence. And that sort of represented him, because he himself was from the heart, but very intelligent. In the fact that he also had members of Cud there, and Barney Hoskins, the great music author.
Yes.
And you had like Simon Warner, the great beatnik poetry expert from Leeds Beckett University. And then when it went to the wake at the Cairn Hotel, Dave Haslam of Hacienda fame turned up to do a DJ set.
Oh, I mean, gosh.
What an occasion in Harrogate.
Yeah.
But only what he deserved, or Bill Byford deserved.
I mean, what a wonderful tribute that is, Graham. I'm so pleased to hear that. And I mean, we so enjoyed having him on here as one of our special guests. And so a fitting tribute, and that's lovely. And actually, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because this week I'm going to be doing the eulogy for my mother, Prue, and that's interesting about perhaps speaking off the cuff and just capturing the character through emotion. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think just through plodding through a load of detail. This is my way of thinking. This is how I'm going to perhaps treat it. And I know maybe it's a strange comparison to make, but I think when it comes to capturing character, I don't think he did this, they did that, then this, then that is necessarily the way to do it. I think if you capture the character, that is better. That's what people connect with, the character. The details there.
Yeah, but the whole Byford family, including Honor, his wife, they're like full of character themselves. As well as being intelligent, they've got passion and self-confidence. It's an exceptional family. Not everybody can do that.
No, you're right, Graham. I accept that, and that's a fair point. And not everyone could do that. And I know some people get nervous about doing these things, and lots of notes and whatever. So anyway, we'll see how it goes on Thursday when I face that challenge. So we'll see how that goes.
Forward to that.
No, I know.
Occasion.
But we thank a beautiful life, and I think that's exactly what you did with Heath Common as well. And that last thing you mentioned as well there about teaching. That's an interesting that's another special gift that someone can have as a teacher, and as a head teacher above all. Pulling everyone together, teachers and pupils. That's a real skill as well, isn't it?
Well, yeah, he was a big character. He's a big man. People who are good, positive, tend to be a bit wiffly-waffly. There was nothing wiffly about
true.
Bill Byford. You know,
Yeah.
he was the sort of man you'd follow into battle.
Mm. Mm. Indeed. So, well, Graham, it's a shorter edition than sometimes. I'm off to see, well, Only Fools and Horses tonight, the musical.
Really? Is
The
this some
musical.
sort of punishment?
Well, Graham, if I were to see it in London, I would be seeing Vinnie Jones in it, and I would be seeing, this is at Christmas time, and I'd be seeing
That'd be
Paul
quite funny.
Whitehouse in it. So that
Well,
might have been. So anyway,
that'd be
that's nothing
different.
against who
Yeah.
I'm seeing tonight. So anyway, I might talk about it next week. Except that
I
we've
want
got
to hear
special
about
guests,
it.
so I probably won't, because we're looking forward just to plug in advance next week for our 200th edition. We're going to have field music with
are
us,
going to turn up,
which is wonderful. So yeah, so we really look forward to that.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.